I was never much of a gambler, but impulse decisions had a way of sneaking into my life. That's the only explanation I have for spending exactly one credit. A single, lonely credit on a battered old container in a place where fortunes were regularly spent on exotic relics or lethal weaponry. Turley's terminal was a sprawling labyrinth of docking bays, auction halls, and shady back corridors, all saturated with the distinct smell of engine fumes and tension. Still wearing a hint of my former uniform, just the boots and the threadbare jacket, I mingled with the crowd of traders and opportunists hoping for that elusive score. They called it the surplus auction, though everyone knew that surplus was a generous label. You could find anything there, from half-functional plasma rifles to mislabeled crates of alien produce. Nobody seemed even mildly interested in Container 639. It was listed on the data scroll as salvage from unidentified wreck. The lot images showed a rectangular hunk of metal with scorch marks and a big dent near the bottom. The auctioneer, a wiry human with an amplified voice, couldn't have spent more than 4 seconds describing it before he launched into the more impressive items. Advanced ship reactors, neural nets, or stolen prototypes from defunct research labs. I was on the verge of leaving. I had a halfway decent plan to buy a broken thruster coil for cheap, fix it, and sell it for a profit. The coil's bidding got way too high, though, so I was stuck with money in my pocket and a swirl of disappointment in my gut. That's when the auctioneer announced Container 639 for the third and final time, asking if anyone cared. Nobody raised a hand. Without fully realizing what I was doing, I lifted mine and shouted, "One credit." It was more a reflex than a real plan. The crowd's mild laughter and the auctioneer's bemused snort should have clued me in that I'd just done something ridiculous. "Sold to the gentleman in the back," he said, tapping on his datapad. "I hope you enjoy your prize." A little wave of chuckles spread through the hall, and my cheeks burned at the mild embarrassment. But I also felt a strange little thrill. One credit. Even if I found nothing valuable in there, I'd barely lost anything. I paid my coin and arranged transport to my ship, the Starcatcher, which was docked to Bay 12. My next stop was the vast cargo elevator leading from the auction floor to the main docking area. As I waited for the station's drones to haul Container 639 onto the platform, I found my mind drifting back to all the reasons I'd ended up here. I'd served nearly a decade in the Coalition Navy as a pilot, flying everything from short-range fighters to heavy cruisers. After a certain mission went sour, too many friends lost, the blame tossed in every direction, I decided I'd had enough. Salvage work offered a kind of solitude and a chance to put my mechanical skills to good use. My new business was scraping by, but just barely. Tully's Terminal Surplus Auction was supposed to be my shot at flipping cheap equipment for enough profit to keep me flying another few months. Instead, I was left with a giant container nobody else wanted. The drones set it onto the cargo elevator with a heavy clang of metal on metal, and I rode down with it to the docking ring. My ship was an old Corvette class repurposed for salvage, a single-pilot vessel with a small cargo bay, minimal living quarters, and a well-worn cockpit. The paint was chipped, the engines whined if I pushed them too hard, but Starcatcher was mine, and I loved her. I keyed my docking hatch and directed the drones to load the container into the cargo hold. The container's presence felt ominous the moment it sat within my hold. The outer shell had a battered, almost scorched texture, as though it had entered an atmosphere at high velocity. There were odd markings, half-burned insignias I couldn't read. One corner was dented inward, hinting at an impact from inside rather than outside. It was sealed shut with a complicated dual-lock system I recognized as military-grade. That instantly raised alarms in my mind. If this container held something once belonging to a military or paramilitary group, the possibilities range from bombs to contraband. Let's see if I still remember my old lock bypass training. I muttered to myself, rolling up my sleeves. My hacking device was a battered multi-tool, about the size of a pistol grip, with cables and prongs for every known standard. I slid a connector into the container's control panel. It beeped in protest, and a few sparks flickered. 10 minutes of cursing and reprogramming later, the lock gave a faint hiss. Cautiously, I stepped back. The hatch began sliding open, letting out a blast of cold vapor that rolled across the floor. My heart hammered as I tried to peer through the swirling mist. Slowly, it dissipated, revealing the interior, row upon row of stasis pods. Each transparent capsule contained a motionless figure. Slender, humanoid bodies, feminine in build, dressed in drab, form-fitting garments. Their skin hues varied from pearl white to vibrant gold to faint lavender, each color more striking than the next. I swallowed hard, my mind struggling to catch up. People. I had purchased a container filled with people. Alien women, by the looks of them, all in what appeared to be some form of suspended animation. Some had pale hair, some had brilliant eyes visible through the frosty glass. I leaned in toward the nearest pod, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Suddenly, the pod's internal lights flickered, and an alert beep sounded. The stasis field crackled, then disengaged. The occupants stirred, eyelashes fluttering. My entire body tensed as the glass lifted with a pneumatic whir, and she slowly opened her eyes. Her skin was a dusky rose color, her hair so pale it was almost white, and her eyes a warm, liquid gold that focused on me with immediate intensity. "Where am I?" she asked softly. Her voice was surprisingly clear, tinged with confusion, but carrying a melodic quality that instantly set my nerves on edge. She blinked, taking in my human appearance, my half-worn military jacket, the cargo hold beyond. "This is Turley's terminal," I managed to say. "I'm Dylan Cross. I bought this container at the auction. I had no idea there were people inside." She pushed herself upright, gracefully stepping out of the pod. Even though she had to be shaky after who knew how long in stasis, she carried herself with a poise I found remarkable. "I am Avinia," she said. "We are Eliani." Her gaze scanned the container's interior as stasis pods began to cycle open, the technology following a chain reaction once the first was deactivated. "How long have we been in stasis?" I'm not sure," I admitted. The container was listed as unidentified salvage. Nobody mentioned living beings. "Are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" Avinia gave a small shake of her head. "Our physiology is resilient. The stasis was designed to preserve us. But how did we come to be in auction?" Her voice held a quiet urgency, as though the realization of her situation was sinking in. "We were captured by Torrent slavers en route to the Eliani homeworld. Our ship was attacked, but I can't recall the rest. Pods all around us were opening now, revealing more of these alien women with uniquely colored skin, amber, lilac, sky blue, each with an otherworldly beauty. They looked around in confusion, a few exchanging words in soft voices, others eyeing me warily. One with emerald-hued skin approached and spoke to Avinia in their native tongue, something melodic and fluid that I couldn't decipher. Avinia turned back to me. "Dylan Cross, you said? You claim you purchased this container without knowing what was inside." I raised my hands defensively. "I swear, yes. I spent 1 credit. The container was described as worthless salvage." She studied me for several heartbeats, her golden eyes narrowed, as though assessing if I was telling the truth. Then, with a gentle nod, she said, "Slavers sometimes abandon containers full of captives if a raid is imminent. Better to lose the shipment than be caught red-handed." I gestured toward the open hatch leading deeper into my ship. "You're free now. If you'd like, we can go to the station authorities. I can help you file for refugee status or whatever else you might need." Her expression flickered from relief to caution. "The authorities on many stations work with slavers under the table. We have to be careful." She turned to her companions, addressing them in their own language, explaining the situation with clipped, urgent words. They responded with subdued nods, weariness etched into their faces. I felt a pang of pity. They looked exhausted, lost, and suddenly my random purchase felt like a massive responsibility. I led them into the Starcatcher's small common area, which was basically a single room with a couple of fold-out benches, a kitchenette, and a holoscreen. They filed in quietly, some still shivering off the aftereffects of stasis. Avinia knelt beside one who was trembling, whispering reassurances. Another was leaning against the bulkhead, Her eyes closed as though the light was too bright. The reality crashed over me. I had 20 living, breathing, alien women aboard my ship, all in need of safety and shelter, and I had no plan. Let me see if I can contact station security, I offered. I'll try to find someone honest. Failing that, there might be others I can talk to, maybe someone from the coalition who handles new arrivals. I tapped the control console. The overhead lights flickered, as though my ship was protesting all this unexpected company. Avinia rose, looking over my shoulder at the console. Before you do that, please understand that we've encountered many double crosses. Torn slavers have connections in high places. If the local authorities are compromised, we could end up back on the auction block. I drew a shaky breath, remembering what I'd seen in my years of service. Entire stations run by corrupt officials who turned a blind eye to slavery in exchange for bribes. But I also recalled good people, men and women in uniform who would never stand for such horrors. All right, I won't rush. Let me think this through. It turned out I didn't have much time to think. My attempt to raise the station's security feed triggered an automated scan of my cargo log. The system flagged me for an unscheduled addition, 20 unidentified life forms. Within minutes, an incoming call from Inspector Garan lit up the console. Garen's face filled the screen, a stern, sharp-featured man with iron-gray hair. Dylan Cross, what exactly did you bring on board? I kept my expression neutral. I bought a salvage container. Turns out it wasn't scrap. There are survivors inside. Former slaves. I want to bring them in for refugee processing. His thin lips tightened. You can't just keep them aboard, Cross. That's a violation of station protocol. I need you to let me and my team inspect them for contraband and ID verification. A few of the Eliani overheard and exchanged alarmed looks. Avinia touched my shoulder, shaking her head in warning. Her fear was palpable. I tried to defuse the tension. Look, Garan, they're just refugees. No contraband, no trouble. They need help. Can you guarantee they won't be locked up or turned over to undesirables? He sidestepped the question. Bring them to Dock 6 for mandatory processing. Failure to comply means you'll be in direct violation of station regs. I realized then how precarious this was. If Garan was on the syndicate's payroll, this could be a trap. I stalled for time. Understood. Give me an hour to get them oriented and clothed, then I'll escort them personally. He nodded curtly. 1 hour, Cross. Then I'll expect your arrival. I killed the connection and exhaled. Avinia's shoulders were tense. We don't trust him, she said quietly. I shook my head. Neither do I. But if we try to leave the station without clearance, Garan will lock down our docking clamp or scramble security drones. We'll be fugitives. I have an idea, though. If this station is compromised, we'll need a quick escape route. In a flurry of hush planning, I told Avinia and the others that the Starcatcher had a backup infiltration system. I'd spent half my savings installing it, an old override code from my days in the Coalition Navy that might let me slip out of the station's hold if I needed to. But it was risky and likely to blow my cover. We agreed to at least attempt official channels, see if there was an honest route forward, and only resort to an illegal exit if we had no choice. Preparing them for the rendezvous with Garan was strange. I scrounged the few spare garments I had, which weren't nearly enough to clothe 20 people. Some had to wear my old flight suits or mismatched sweaters. They seemed grateful anyway. Their subdued voices lingered with a gentle musicality in the small corridor. Oddly, the presence of so many Eliani felt comforting. There was a quiet unity among them, as though every shift of expression or small movement was part of a collective harmony. When we disembarked at Dock 6, Garan was waiting with 4 armed officers. The officers looked uneasy, no doubt noticing that these were obviously not typical vagrants or smugglers. Avinia, standing at my side, exuded calm, though I could see tension in the set of her jaw. Garen's gaze flicked to me. This way, he said, we'll process them in the station's immigration office. His tone was clipped. We followed along, navigating the stark corridors of Tolese Terminal. The overhead lights hummed, and I felt the weight of watchers, surveillance cameras, passers-by glancing curiously at the line of alien women. My heart pounded with the sure knowledge that any of these onlookers could be an informant or an operative from a slaver syndicate. The Eliani walked with quiet dignity, but the fear in their eyes was evident. The office Garan led us to was more like an interrogation zone. The walls were blank metal, the corners fitted with unobtrusive cameras, and a single wide desk sat at the center. Garan gestured for the Eliani to wait along one side, while he busied himself with a data pad. A bored clerk in the corner pretended to type, but I suspected it was more for show. My stomach sank. This was too controlled, too hidden away from the busier sections of the station. I stepped forward, clearing my throat. So, Garan, you'll take their statements and put them under protective custody, correct? He barely glanced at me. Sure, protective custody. That phrase sounded more like a death sentence. Avinia must have sensed the mounting danger. She approached me and whispered, "We can't stay here." I can almost feel their intentions through their expressions. One of the Eliani, a slight woman with teal-colored skin, moved closer to Garan and met his gaze. His eyes flitted over her with a predatory glint that made my blood run cold. "You see," Avinia murmured. "He looks at us like we're objects." I pressed a button on the comm device strapped to my wrist. It sent a silent signal to the Starcatcher's infiltration system. A minute was all we needed to scramble the station's clamp codes, letting my ship power up. But we still had to get out of this room. Cautiously, I stepped in front of Garen's desk and forced an amicable smile. "Hey, Inspector, the Eliani are anxious. Mind if we do this quickly?" He raised a brow. "I was under the impression you were in no hurry." His hand drifted toward the side of his belt. I caught a glimpse of what might be a tranquilizer injector. Another officer fingered the holster of a shock pistol. A wave of adrenaline spiked through me. "Change of plans," I said, stepping back. "I think we'll head out." I shot Avinia a look that said, "Run." Chaos erupted. Garan barked an order. His officers tried to flank us, blocking the exit. Avinia let out a sharp, musical cry, and in an instant, the Eliani sprang into action. They had no weapons, but a few seemed skilled in close combat. One disarmed an officer with a deft twist of her body, sending his pistol skidding across the floor. Another kicked the second officer's legs out from under him. I lunged for Garan, grabbing his wrist before he could fire the injector. He snarled at me, and we struggled. The board clerk was cowering behind the desk, shouting into a comm for backup. We tore free of the office, sprinting down the corridor. Alarms blared, station announcements clamoring about a security breach. The Eliani moved with surprising speed, some helping the slower ones. I hovered near the rear, guiding them toward a secondary corridor that curved back toward the docking ring. Station drones rolled in from side passages, extending mechanical arms fitted with stun prods. I cursed under my breath, but Avinia and two others concentrated, focusing their gazes on the drones with intense calm. Weirdly, the drones froze, their motors whirring in confusion. That gave us enough time to slip past them. I was too busy trying not to get stunned to ask how they did that. By the time we reached the Starcatcher, every alarm in the station was howling. I could practically taste the tension in the recycled air. My ship's main hatch stood open, the infiltration code having fooled the clamp mechanism just in time. We piled inside, and I hammered at the cockpit controls. The engines roared to life, but the station's automated system tried to seal the bulkhead behind us, blocking the exit tunnel. My fingers flew across the console, entering override codes. Then, with a triumphant beep, the clamps disengaged, and I yanked back on the throttle. The Starcatcher lurched forward, scraping the docking tunnel's edge with a shrill screech. We blasted out into the blackness of space, leaving chaos behind. We were free, but only for the moment. I knew Garan would scramble pursuit ships if they had any. Sure enough, the sensors blinked with an alert, a patrol frigate launching from the station, vectoring in behind us. The Eliani clustered in the narrow corridor behind the cockpit, gripping the walls for balance. "Are they going to shoot us?" one asked, voice trembling. "Quite possibly," I said, my heart racing. "I'll try to jump to FTL, but this is an old ship. We need a minute to calculate coordinates." "Hang on." I thrust the throttle wide open, diving toward the swirling belt of space debris near Tully's terminal. No sane pilot would attempt it at high speed, but I figured the frigate pilot would be equally wary. The Starcatcher rattled violently as we soared past chunks of old station hulls, discarded cargo pods, and other cosmic junk. My sensors squealed with proximity alarms. I gritted my teeth, weaving a path. Behind us, the frigate slowed, too large to maneuver comfortably. That gave me the 30 seconds I needed. My NAV system beeped, spitting out a possible FTL route to a seldom-used corridor that might lead us near a small planetoid, then onto Coalition space. Initiating jump, I called. The engine's hum shifted to a deep, resonant thrum. Light outside the cockpit stretched into star lines, and with a jolt, we were gone. The tension lingered. I sat back in the pilot's chair, noticing I was soaked in sweat. The Eliani gathered behind me, wide-eyed. Avinia placed a hand on my shoulder, giving a gentle squeeze. "Thank you," she said, voice layered with gratitude and sorrow. "We seem to have escaped, but it won't end here, will it?" "No," I replied, shutting down a handful of alarms still blinking on the console. "Trelease Terminal will pass your location to anyone willing to pay enough. We need a safer haven, but all major ports have their share of corruption." Avinia's eyes flicked toward her companions. "We have nowhere else to go," she said softly. The Eliani home system was overrun by slavers. Most of our colonies are scattered or hidden. Many of us have no families left. We're alone. I turned my chair, meeting the gaze of every Eliani in that cramped cockpit. 20 pairs of eyes locked on me. I felt the weight of their hope, their exhaustion. "You're not alone," I said, surprising even myself with the conviction in my voice. "You have me, and we'll figure this out together." They thanked me quietly, and in that unspoken moment, I sensed a kind of acceptance from them, as if they had decided they could trust me. It was humbling, because I was just one guy with a rickety salvage ship who'd spent a single credit on a mysterious container. Yet here we were, bound by circumstance. We dropped out of FTL near a tiny planetoid designated K-77, an airless rock used sometimes by smugglers or travelers for repairs. Scans showed no active ships on the surface. I set the Starcatcher down carefully in a crater that blocked us from detection by passing vessels. The landing gear touched down with a crunch of dust and gravel, and the engines powered down to a low hum. Our location might buy us a little time to fix the damage from our frantic getaway and figure out our next steps. The cargo hold, now empty of stasis pods, made a decent space for the Eliani to rest. I rummaged through my limited supplies and tossed them blankets, water pouches, and the last of my ration packs. They accepted these with surprising graciousness, dividing resources among themselves efficiently, as though they had done this a dozen times before. It made me wonder about their culture, how they'd learned such communal living. While we worked, I noticed that some Eliani seemed especially attuned to mechanical systems. I'd see one run her fingertips along a console panel, eyes fluttering as though feeling its energy. Others had a more direct empathy with living beings, comforting the frightened ones, or tending to a bruise or scratch with a gentleness that was almost medicinal. Their synergy was incredible, as though each individual contributed a piece of a collective puzzle. The repairs on the Starcatcher were minimal, mostly scuffed plating and a damaged sensor node. I sat on the floor with a spanner and a coil of wire, trying to fix the node while Lavinia knelt beside me. She studied me, curiosity in her golden eyes. "I was never good with machines," she admitted, "but I can sense your focus. You really love fixing things, don't you?" I shrugged. "It's methodical, I guess. Direct. I can see a problem, solve it step by step. It's a nice break from the rest of the galaxy's chaos." She traced a finger over the sensor node, her voice dropping to a whisper. "In Eliani culture, those who repair and preserve are respected. We believe every life, every object, has a resonance that can be nurtured or damaged. You're nurturing." Her words, warm and unexpected, sent a flicker of heat through my chest. I lowered my gaze to the node. "I don't know about that. I just do what I can." There was a moment of silence before she spoke again. "My people also believe that a great debt is owed to one who saves lives, especially from slavery. Dylan, you didn't have to help us. You could have turned the container in for a small profit or walked away. Yet you risked everything to give us a chance. I paused in my tinkering. I'm not comfortable with the idea of being owed anything. You're free beings. You owe me nothing. She touched my forearm gently. To an Eliani, saving lives is not a transaction, but it does create a bond. For us, that bond is deeper than gratitude. Her voice had a slight tremor, as though she was carefully selecting each word. We have an ancient practice known as the HFY, a bonding ritual that merges the saved and the savior, unifying them. It's not forced, of course, but it's a tradition we hold dear. I blinked, setting down my tool. A bonding ritual? That sounds significant. Are you telling me you all want to bond with me? Avinia exhaled softly, her golden eyes flickering. All Eliani in this container were saved by you, so the potential is there. But only if you accept. The Ithari ritual, however, is intimate. It weaves mental, emotional, and physical threads together. My heart pounded. 20 alien women and a bonding ritual that included physical intimacy? I'd never encountered anything remotely like that. I'm not sure what to say, I stammered. That's quite the concept. Where I come from, people pair off or form small families. Not large group bonds. We understand, she said, smiling gently. We don't mean to overwhelm you, but we wanted you to know it's part of our culture. The ritual also grants certain benefits, like strengthened empathy, better collaboration, and in rare cases, an enhanced ability to connect with technology or environment. It's how we survive the harsh climates of our original homeworld. I nodded slowly, absorbing this. That's a lot to process. She withdrew her hand. Take your time. It's an option, not an obligation. Just know that the deeper our bond, the safer we are from what's to come. We finished repairing the sensor node, and I tried to push aside the lingering swirl of thoughts about the Ithari. My focus shifted to our predicament. We were still on the run, with limited supplies. The Eliani needed official protection, maybe from the Coalition, but getting near officialdom risked running into more corruption. I thought about contacting an old friend, Captain Robert Hayes, who was stationed at a Coalition outpost known as Oron's Reach. Hayes was an honorable type. He wouldn't just sell us out. If we could get there, maybe we'd have a chance at Sanctuary. After a tense day of resting on K-77's surface, we launched again. The Eliani had grown comfortable enough that they spread out across the Starcatcher's cramped interior, claiming corners for sleeping or quiet conversation. Their presence was no longer jarring. It felt oddly natural, as though we were forging some small community aboard. The route to Oron's Reach would take several short FDL jumps, during which we'd be vulnerable to detection by outposts loyal to slavers or shady cartels. Nonetheless, it felt like the best shot. The first jump went smoothly. The second jump, not so much. We emerged in real space near a swirling cloud of cosmic dust, and found ourselves face-to-face with a Fenrath Syndicate cruiser. Fenrath was a name I had heard whispered on the edges of Coalition territory, rumored to be one of the biggest profiteers in the slave trade. My heart dropped. The cruiser had a sleek profile, bristling with advanced scanning arrays. Within seconds, they hailed us. A sneering voice echoed over comms. Unidentified salvage vessel. This is Captain Threx of Fenrath Syndicate. Power down and prepare to be boarded. We have reason to believe you carry valuable cargo belonging to our associates. My hands clenched around the controls. I caught Avinia's alarmed expression from the co-pilot's seat. The other Eliani pressed into the cockpit doorway, radiating fear. We can't fight them, I muttered. They'd tear us apart. But we can't let them board, Avinia whispered. They'll take us. I scrolled through the star map, searching for a way out. The cosmic dust around us was too thin to hide in. The only potential refuge was an asteroid cluster a few thousand kilometers away. Hold on, I said, then jammed the throttle to maximum. The Starcatcher surged forward, engines shrieking in protest. Captain Threx's voice crackled back into the cockpit. That's a poor choice, salvage scum. Moments later, sensor pings indicated they were launching fighters. I wove the Starcatcher through the emptiness toward the distant asteroids, cursing the ship's old engines with every breath. The Eliani tapped my shoulders or pointed to the sensor readouts, coordinating directions. Their synergy was remarkable. One would observe the enemy's vector, another would handle power distribution, another would feed me real-time data on the asteroids. It was almost like they operated on a shared wavelength. In the heat of the chase, it occurred to me that what they were doing was already akin to a partial bond, though not fully formalized. We reached the asteroid cluster, a ragged field of tumbling rocks. I angled the Starcatcher into a narrow gap between two massive chunks of ice and metal. The Fenrath fighters swarmed behind us, but they couldn't match my reckless maneuvers in such tight confines. Avinia and another Eliani exclaimed a warning, an incoming missile lock. I jerked the controls, slipping behind an asteroid. The missile slammed into the rock, erupting in a brilliant flash. We ducked away, the debris spattering against our shields. Shields down to 40%, someone called from behind me. Engines overheating. The tension soared. The Starcatcher groaned as I pushed it to its limit. Another wave of fighters swept in from above, herding us toward the cruiser's flank. They fired short energy bursts, forcing me to swerve and lose precious ground. Avinia grabbed my arm. "We can't keep this up. Dylan, we can do something." Ithari would let us act in complete unison, even sharing reaction times. It's the only way we can outmaneuver them in such a battered ship. I understood instantly. She was referring to the full bonding ritual done spontaneously under crisis. My survival instincts warred with my sense of what was rational. "Are you sure it can work so quickly?" She nodded, her golden eyes fierce. "Our synergy will be immediate, but it requires you to let us in, physically and mentally, all of us. Do you accept that risk?" Laser fire rattled the hull. Time was a luxury we didn't have. My eyes flicked to the readouts, saw the fighters bracketing us. We wouldn't last another minute. I drew a deep breath, feeling the raw desperation of the Eliani in the cockpit with me. I exhaled and nodded. "Yes," I said. "Yes, let's do it." Avinia's eyes shone, and she called out to her companions, who answered in their melodic language, each voice carrying determination. We needed a space to conduct the ritual, somewhere we wouldn't be rocked by constant turbulence. The only feasible place was the Starcatcher's cramped corridor or the common area. The Eliani swiftly took control of the ship's autopilot, programming it to hold a spiral course through the asteroid field for a few precious minutes. Down in the common area, the Eliani formed a loose circle around me. The lights flickered as the engines stressed, and the floor vibrated with distant weapons fire. Still, they moved with calm purpose. Avinia stood at my side, explaining in hurried whispers. They would chant an ancient harmony to align minds, then proceed with the physical contact that activated the Ithari link. My heart hammered, uncertain what to expect. Their soft chanting resonated through the metal walls, weaving a tapestry of sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I felt an otherworldly hum building in my chest. The Eliani drew closer, each placing a hand against me or another of their sisters, forming a chain of contact. There was no shame or hesitation in their gestures, just unity and acceptance. Heat coursed through me, and the chanting rose in pitch. A swirl of emotions, thoughts, and half-formed images rushed into my mind. I caught glimpses of their memories, a thriving colony, then fire and screams as slavers attacked. A stasis pod sealed shut, a sense of hopeless drifting, and then hope rekindled when I opened that container. The final step happened in a blur of sensation, bodies pressed to mine, lips grazing in a cascade of gentle, urgent contact. It was overwhelming, but strangely beautiful, as though every boundary between us blurred in a single tide of shared feeling. I heard my own voice cry out, maybe in surprise or ecstasy or both. Then, like a sudden jolt, the bond snapped into place. My vision flooded with color, a prism of consciousness that included not just my own perceptions, but the vantage point of each Eliani. They felt me, and I felt them. My nerves tingled with an electric synergy. It was as if we were 21 souls sharing one breathing organism. The overhead alarm wrenched us back to reality. Enemy fighters closing in. I scrambled to my feet, hardly aware of the trembling in my limbs. The Eliani soared alongside me, their eyes glowing with renewed energy, as though the bond had ignited an inner light. We hurried to the cockpit, and I slid into the pilot's seat. Now, though, it was different. As soon as my hands gripped the controls, I felt their presence guiding me, feeding me data about angles, velocities, engine stress. It was like having a team of co-pilots inside my brain. I pitched the Starcatcher into a twisting roll, squeaking through gaps in the asteroid field so tight that under normal circumstances I'd have crashed. But with the Eliani's reflexes and my piloting skills fused, we outmaneuvered the fighters. On the sensors, I could sense them in a near-literal way, as though the bond extended into the technology, letting me feel the proximity of each hostile craft. My mind was a kaleidoscope of impressions, but somehow it was perfectly clear. We soared through the debris, forcing the Fenrath ships to break off or risk a fatal collision. The cruiser tried to lock a tractor beam on us, but we slipped behind a drifting chunk of rock at the last second. I found a safe vector, and with one synchronous push from all of us, the Starcatcher roared into FTL. The Fenrath ships vanished from the sensor readouts behind us, left spinning in the asteroid cluster. Exhaustion and triumph warred within me. I slumped in the pilot's seat. The Eliani crowded around in a mixture of relief and euphoria. Our bond was still there, humming at the edges of my consciousness, an intimate tapestry of shared emotions. I felt Avina's joy, the teal-skinned woman's gratitude, the emerald-hued one's fierce pride, and so many others swirling together. We dropped out of FTL near a coordinate that was close to Oron's reach. This time, the jump was short and unremarkable, leaving us drifting in relatively calm space. Slowly, I stood up and turned to face the Eliani. So we did it. My voice came out rough, tears unexpectedly stinging my eyes as the magnitude of it all settled on me. Yes, Avina said, her voice resonant with shared emotion. The Ithari is complete. We are bonded. I stepped forward, and the Eliani as a group seemed to converge. There was a mutual understanding that, from this point onward, we existed as something larger than individuals. The rush of that knowledge made my heart clench. We all needed rest, so we limped the Starcatcher into orbit around a barren moon, scanning carefully to ensure no one was lurking nearby. The moment the engines powered down, exhaustion knocked us flat. Some Eliani curled up in corners, others in the small bunks. A few, like Avina, stayed with me in the cockpit, dozing off in the pilot's seats. Time blurred. Eventually, I woke, the ache in my muscles mixed with a strange, comforting glow in my mind, traces of the bond. I realized we had to push on. We needed to reach Oron's reach before Fenrath or some other slaver group tracked us again. The Eliani stirred, drawn from their sleep by my thoughts. We readied the star charts and prepped for one final jump. Approaching Oron's reach triggered a wave of old memories. I'd once docked here on official coalition business, back when I wore a crisp uniform and still believed wholeheartedly in the system. The station was large, ring-shaped, and bristling with turrets and sensor arrays. As we sent a docking request, I prayed that my friend Robert Hayes was the one handling security. A tired-sounding control officer responded, instructing us to proceed to Dock 14. We complied, tension coiling in my stomach. If the coalition here had been compromised, we'd be handing ourselves over to the wolves. But we had few other options. The docking clamps locked in, and a small team of coalition personnel approached. At the front was Captain Hayes, older now, with streaks of gray in his hair, but the same steadfast gaze. His eyes went wide when he recognized me stepping out of the Starcatcher, followed by 20 alien women. "Dylan Cross," he said in disbelief. "What the hell's going on here?" I laughed shakily. "Long story, Rob. I need your help. These Eliani are refugees, and there are powerful forces who want to turn them into slaves again." His expression shifted from surprise to resolute concern. Let's get you inside before the rumor mill starts churning. I assume there's more to this than meets the eye. Avinia and I explained the situation in one of the station's secure conference rooms. Hayes nodded grimly, acknowledging that slaver syndicates had infiltrated many corners of the galaxy. Thankfully, he was still an honest man. He set up a discreet meeting with the station commander and a legal representative from the coalition. The Eliani described their ordeal, the repeated attempts to recapture them, and the necessity of official refugee status. We also revealed carefully that we performed the Ithari bond. That raised a few eyebrows, but the coalition representative seemed intrigued rather than judgmental. Over the course of a tense day, we navigated the labyrinth of coalition paperwork, official interviews, and medical scans. Hayes quietly used his authority to shield us from any prying eyes. For a while, it seemed we might succeed without encountering further sabotage. But then word leaked that a Fenrath syndicate agent was on the station, bribing people to reveal our location. A wave of panic swept through the Eliani. Our bond pulsed with shared anxiety. Hayes caught wind of it and arranged an emergency hearing with the station commander to finalize the refugees' protected status before the slavers could move. The hearing was a solemn affair in a large chamber with a half-circle of coalition officers at the front. The station commander, a stern woman named Harrow, presided. She listened carefully as the Eliani described how they'd ended up in stasis pods, drifting from one slaver cargo hold to another. Then she turned to me, asking why I was risking my ship and my freedom for them. I said, I served the coalition for years, and I left because of the rot I saw in the system. But I still believe in doing what's right. These people have suffered enough. They were never meant to be cargo. Someone has to stand up for them. Harrow's eyes flicked to the Eliani, then to the data pad detailing the Ithari bond. We have precedent for granting protected status to endangered species with unique cultural practices. But are you prepared for the responsibility, Commander Cross? A bond of this nature is not easily broken. My throat tightened as the weight of that question hit me. Through the bond, I felt the Eliani's collective support. They were with me, trusting me, loving me in their quiet, profound way. I nodded. I am prepared, Commander Harrow. We're already bound, in heart and mind. She studied me a moment longer, then tapped her data pad. Very well. I grant the Eliani refugee status under the Coalition's Endangered Sentient Act. Their bond with you shall be recognized as a legitimate familial or communal link protected by law. A flood of relief washed through the room and through our bond. We had done it. The Fenrath Syndicate had lost their legal claim, and if they dared try to abduct the Eliani now, they would be attacking recognized refugees under coalition protection. That carried a hefty penalty, even for criminals. We left the hearing together, a ragged but triumphant group. Hayes met me in the corridor and clasped my shoulder. Damn Cross. Of all the things I expected you to bring me, 20 bonded Eliani was not one of them. But I'm proud of you. I smiled, exhaustion weighing on me. Thanks, Rob. I appreciate everything. Our next concern was how to build new lives for the Eliani. They couldn't just live on my old ship forever. Some wanted to search for any surviving relatives. Others dreamed of establishing a small settlement where they could raise children. A few were content simply to remain by my side, traveling as we saw fit. And thanks to the Ithari, we shared an indescribable closeness. The Coalition granted them temporary housing on the station while we planned. I found myself constantly drifting between the administrative offices, the Starcatcher, and the living quarters where the Eliani stayed. Even when physically apart, I felt them in my mind, a subtle chorus of presence. I could sense Avinia's relief, the teal-skinned woman's curiosity as she roamed the station, or the Emerald One's fascination with starship schematics. Eventually, after more discussions with Hayes and a few sympathetic officers, we decided the best path was to gather resources, then head into the quieter sectors of Coalition space. We would search for any rumored Eliani enclaves. If none existed, we would scout a suitable planet to serve as a new home. The Coalition gave me official documents recognizing me as a caretaker and advocate for the Eliani, enabling me to negotiate passage and land claims on their behalf. On our final day at Oron's Reach, I stood on an observation deck with Avinia, watching cargo freighters come and go through the station's docking ring. The vastness of space stretched beyond the reinforced windows, a swirl of stars and distant nebulas. "What's on your mind?" she asked, slipping beside me, so her arm brushed mine. I contemplated how drastically my life had changed since I impulsively lifted my hand at that surplus auction. "It's strange," I murmured. "I spent 1 credit and somehow ended up with a family. Or maybe that's too small a word for what we are." She smiled, her eyes glowing with a mixture of affection and amusement. "Family is a human term, but I think it fits. We're more than that, though. We're an HFY collective. Each day, our bond grows stronger. We can sense each other's hopes, fears, joys. With you, we feel safe in a way we never thought possible." I swallowed, heart swelling. "I just hope I can live up to your trust. I'm not exactly perfect, you know." She touched my cheek gently. "Perfection isn't what we need. We need someone who cares, someone who believes in our worth and will fight for it. That is what you are." I leaned forward, pressing my forehead to hers. A swirl of warmth and belonging filled me, reflected in the bond that tied me to all the others. It struck me that maybe this was the life I was meant to have all along, far from the narrow corridors of power and the cynicism of the Navy. Maybe I'd found my purpose in protecting these extraordinary beings who had been cast aside as cargo. Together, we left the observation deck, heading back to the Starcatcher. She wasn't much to look at, battered and scarred from our narrow escapes, but she was ours. The Eliani had spruced up the interior with small tokens from their stasis pods, hand-woven cloths, a few shimmering crystals, and other personal keepsakes that lent the old ship a sense of warmth and home. They greeted us with welcoming smiles, and through our bond, I felt a collective sense of readiness for the next chapter. We launched from Oron's Reach under official clearance, towing a supply crate the Coalition had donated for the journey. Captain Hayes stood in the control tower, giving me a final salute as we drifted out of the station's hangar. It felt both surreal and liberating. The Eliani had chosen to remain together, each of them forging a fresh start. And I was their pilot, their bonded partner. As we soared into FTL, the swirl of stars shifting around us, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My mind flickered with the gentle hum of Ithari, a tapestry of reassuring presences. Only weeks ago, I was a lone salvage operator, scrounging for spare parts. Now, I was at the helm of a shared destiny, responsible for a group of remarkable alien women who call me their savior, their partner, their friend. Their voices rose in the background, murmuring about the star chart, discussing possible routes to hidden Eliani enclaves. Avinia settled into the seat beside me, her posture relaxed, eyes luminous with excitement. One by one, the others joined us in the cockpit or peered in from the corridor. We were cramped, but the closeness felt right. This was no longer just my ship. It was our ship. I gently slid the throttle forward, the engines purring under my touch. A wave of gratitude radiated through the bond, and I realized that they, too, felt the quiet thrill of taking control of their destiny. All of us did. The sense of hope in that moment was almost overwhelming. We had no idea what lay ahead. Maybe more enemies, or harsh worlds, or distant frontiers. But we would face it together. For the first time in too long, I felt an unshakable certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. And to think it had all started with a single credit, an old space container, and 20 sleeping alien beauties waiting to be rescued. I held that thought close as the Starcatcher leapt further into uncharted space, carrying our improbable family toward unknown horizons. Each star beyond the windshield represented a new chance at belonging, at building a life free from fear and slavery. 1 credit, and in return, an entire universe of possibility.